Welcome to the podcast and the church said. My name is Dr. Monique Smith Gadson, also known as Dr. Mo, a Christian licensed professional counselor specializing in marriage and family therapy. I'm your host for this weekly podcast where we discuss church and culture from a Christian counseling perspective. All of our insights are rooted biblically to foster emotional, mental, and spiritual health for individuals and churches. We aim to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. Quite simply, we help the church help the people. Although I am a licensed clinician, the podcast is not intended to serve as therapy. We strongly encourage you to seek out your own personal relationship with a professional therapist. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Hello, everyone. So glad to have you here with me on today, joining us for our conversation this evening. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for listening to the podcast and for those who have been subscribing and sharing and rating. Thank you so much. I'm so very appreciative of your support and your encouragement. And I just ask that you will continue, just please continue to support the work that we are doing here. I do hope and pray that you have found it to be insightful and beneficial, and I do hope that it is a blessing to you. So tonight I am coming to you with a new segment. It is what I have entitled the Midweek Service to the Church segment. So this is not, to take the place of you going to your virtual Bible studies during this time or your midweek services. This segment is just an addition. It's just an offering of my services to the body of Christ. So again, remember, we are all about equipping the saints here, right? So the other day I read this article on Inside Edition, and it was talking about the divorce rate increasing during this time that couples are being quarantined. And that was not necessarily anything of surprise to me, because when the gravity of this pandemic really dawned on me, my first thoughts were, oh no. What's going to happen with families whose busyness severely limits interaction normally? What will happen now when they are forced to spend pretty much every hour of the day with one another? I had done a IG Live, and I mentioned that my concern when we were first talking about this quarantine, my concern was not only for that type of family, but also the family that is highly conflictual and volatile and violent. I thought of the children who have no escape when school was their refuge during the day, where they didn't have to listen to maybe intense arguments or fights breaking out in their homes. Unfortunately, this is some children's and some other adults and adolescents experience. So I thought about what will happen when with these marriages and these families, when they have not engaged in, they have avoided, or they have ignored much needed conversation for whatever the reason. The things that the busyness have served to conceal over time is no longer going to be an adequate covering. We're not going to be able to hide behind that during this quarantine. The things that busyness have provided, that excuse, that I don't have time to talk about this with you right now. I got to get to work, or, I got to drop the kid off here or there. the things that have been so easy to just kind of dismiss with a, like an eye roll and a wave of the hand. I think, unfortunately, we're going to be in a time, or we are in a time, where those things that filled that place, that kept us from having to confront and deal with and discuss the issues and the challenges in our marriages, is not going to be present anymore. Sure, you can clean your house up. Sure, you can, binge watch Netflix, and sure, you can, scroll up and down social media. And there are some that are still working remotely, and so that can still be a filler. But even with that in place, physically, we're going to be in close proximity with one another for quite some time. And even when we think of this COVID-19 virus, the healthiest among us are at risk. Beforehand, we kind of got this sense that, younger people or healthier people or even children just were not being impacted. But we have soon come to recognize that that's a falsehood. That's not true. Even the healthiest have fallen ill, gravely ill. Some have passed away from this horrendous virus. We know that those who are compromised, who have compromised immune systems and other conditions, medical conditions, place them at even a higher risk. So if we even think about it through that lens, then we have to think about families and marriages that are fairly healthy are going to be at risk for some challenges during this time of quarantine. There may be mounting tensions, financially and emotionally. We're concerned about if our jobs have ended. What are we going to do to make money? There are fears. Have we been exposed? Are we a carrier? Are we harming our families? We can't go and check on loved ones that we are concerned about. That's even the healthiest of families. We're going to have these emotional stressors and these concerns of ours. So when you think about families and marriages that are not so healthy, those who are compromised due to lack of effective communication or problem solving, or they may be suppressed due to avoidance, and because unfortunately there is a high degree of conflict and violence that could be present, this quarantine is only going to make that situation all the worse. Those that we would say are at highest risk, that risk is even more intensified during times like these. So I just wanted to talk a little bit to the body of Christ about the challenges in marriage during quarantine, and just to offer just a few simple suggestions, and understanding that in some instances, there are no simple solutions. And so with that, we're just prayerful all around, right? But one thing I want us to think about is that we cannot be delusional. We cannot be negligent in our thinking to say that, again, even the strongest of marriages might not have challenges during this time. I'm not saying that it's got to be like this article, that Inside Edition put out, I'm sorry, put out that says, that the divorce rate is rising with couples who are in quarantine. I'm not saying that everybody is necessarily headed toward divorce court. I'm just saying that there could potentially be challenges that this quarantine is going to bring that couples have not had to deal with before. Just like this whole pandemic has brought about conditions for everyone that we have never had to deal with before, it is going to be the same way when it comes to our relationships, our marriages, okay? So a couple of things I just wanted to share today is that understand that everybody needs space at some time. I don't know if you live in the biggest of houses or the smallest of houses or apartments or a studio apartment. I'm not sure what your living condition might be, but just understand that everyone needs space, and even can be in the same room with a person and give them kind of a quote unquote space if that's the best that you can do. So one of the things that we can do is we can check in on each other and just say, hey, I know we probably have cabin fever like crazy. You can only walk outside, around your yard or around your block so many times. It's raining, you might not even be able to do that. So check in with each other just to say, like, hey, do you need to step outside or sit outside? And hopefully, there's warmer weather on the horizon, and just you want to sit out for a minute. And if they're younger kids, I'll watch the kids, I'll entertain them. If you're caretaking for other people, I'll, kind of keep my eye out here. You go out, enjoy some sunshine, or just get some fresh air, get a walk, or whatever the case may be. Check in on each other to see if each other needs space. And when we walk into the various rooms, maybe if everybody's kind of in their own little space, doing whatever they're doing, before we kind of come in and invade that space, not only physically, but also when we kind of interrupt a person mentally and emotionally, because just because someone is sitting in a room or staring at a computer doesn't mean that their mind might not be engaged in something, or they may have they may be thinking about something. And before we kind of come in and just interrupt that, maybe we should ask permission. Is this a good time? Are you kind of needing this space and time to yourself? If so, I can come back a little bit later. And just that consideration can go a long way if we would extend that to one another. And just to be able to recognize that everybody is going to need some space at some time. Yeah, this is kind of fun to think about it sometimes when we talk about it's a good time for families to be together and, spend time together and play games together. And, we don't do this and we don't do that. And that's true. But for some people, that gets old. And that might get old quicker for some people than others. And I mean, it just is what it is, right? So even with that, there's no need to guilt a person into it, because regardless as to how much togetherness we experience, we still need to have some time of individual space, just to be alone, just to kind of collect our thoughts or decompress, or whatever that might look like. That might be what we need to do. So let's just always be mindful that each other may need space. Talk about the concerns that you do have. If you're concerned financially, what is this going to do to your household economically? If you're wondering, how long are the savings going to last, or if the job has already shut down, or if it is about to shut down. Sometimes we can internalize those concerns and not share them with one another. And sometimes that can manifest itself in different ways. We can just be irritable and frustrated, and we don't want to be bothered. And so when someone asks us something or call our name, we may, reply very abruptly or kind of real gruff like, and, and then people like, okay, I'll just kind of back away from you. But if we understand that what that might be is a cover for some deeply rooted fears and concerns, we should take that time to sit down and try to talk about those concerns. And I do understand that this might be easier for couples who are healthier and practice effective communication as a norm, as opposed to couples who, may not necessarily do so. But if you are able to have those conversations and they don't go awry and find yourself like traveling off the track real quick, fast, and in a hurry, then try to approach those conversations and talk about those things aloud. Externalize those problems where you won't just kind of hold those things in and internalize them and allow those pressures to mount. Okay, so if you can, just talk about what those concerns will be. Of course, do the fun activities together, try to take the walk around the block together, play some games, do some house projects that you haven't had the opportunity, to do. And since we're unable to talk with family members, well, not talk with them, but visit them perhaps during this time that are, near and far, do some video conferencing, try to get a platform where, the majority of the family members can get on at one time, perhaps. That might be something that, you can do as well during this time, especially when we are challenged and concerned about those family members that we can't get to. That can be a suggestion as well. Some of the bigger things that I did want to mention will be for the couples who rarely discuss issues that have really been bothering them along the way. And again, I'm kind of back to, we're in that place where the busyness is not going to be sufficient during this time. There's kind of like really literally nowhere to run. So the things that have been bothering you are now going to be staring you in your face constantly. And this is going to be an opportunity that can make or break some couples. If you have, again, the desire to have these conversations, knowing that they're difficult conversations, then try to step into those conversations very gingerly and be gracious toward one another. Make sure that your speech is going to be seasoned with grace. Try to have those conversations. But I do strongly suggest that if that is not going to be well managed within the couple, by the couple, then I do strongly suggest that you go ahead and you seek out counseling. Most of us as therapists have moved to telehealth anyway due to this pandemic, and especially now that we're sheltered in place, we have no other option but to see or talk to our clients through video conferencing. So this is a good time. It's not like you got to check his schedule or check her schedule. You're both there together. Go ahead and seek out some counseling so that someone can help you facilitate those discussions and help you all to build up that ability to communicate with one another, because that's going to be very, very important to be able to do during this time when we are sheltered in place. And now when these orders have been extended. So yeah, these things that have been problematic for us all along the way are only going to serve to intensify if we don't go ahead and find ways to minimize that risk right about now. So to those of you who know or suspect of friends or family members who are in volatile and violent situations, if they have admitted that to you, and if you know, and if they have been unwilling to leave for whatever the reason is, and we dare not stand in judgment there, because that is a very complicated, complex issue. And you have to understand the underlying dynamics to understand why some people stay. So we have to be very, very careful to that we don't stand in judgment of that. But if you have been suspicious of someone being in an unhealthy or violent relationship, or if you know that to be the case, try to check in as best as you can, carefully, because you don't know if the person who abuses them may have access to their phone or their email messages or whatever the case may be. But if that person knows that you know, maybe there is some kind of a code system that you all can put into place, that if a text message comes to you and that code word is there, you know that that person is in trouble, and that you will call 911 on their behalf and send help to them. Help is still available. Even during this time of quarantine, it is still available. If there is a person who is wanting to escape, especially now, again, that they're sheltered in place and there is no reprieve, there is still help available. So please reach out to those as discreetly as you possibly can. And for those who may be hearing my voice who know that this is not the healthiest of situations, but here I find myself, there is a way out. There is a way out. There are authorities that are still in place that understand that these times are stressful. And so for those marriages and families that are already challenged with this on a daily, this situation is only going to serve to intensify that. There are authorities who are aware of that, and they are still working to help to protect people in these situations. So please, if you need help, do seek it out. There are local numbers that are available. I should have had a number, domestic violence national number ready. Maybe I can Google that real quickly before I finish up. But just check on those that you know that are at highest risk, just like we're doing with those who are elderly and those who have compromised immune systems and other medical conditions that put them at high risk. We're checking in on them. We're bringing things to them to keep them from risking their lives by exposure. Again, we're all at risk. Even the healthiest of us are at risk. But for those that we know are at an increased risk, we take extra precautions with them. So for those marriages that you know that are at an increased risk, please check in on those and do what we can to help everyone to be safe, not only physically from the virus, but also physically from the challenges of a volatile and violent marriage, okay? So thank you so much for allowing me to just offer this service, this midweek service to you all. Do reach out and seek out counseling if you are able to do so. During this time, I think is a good time for us to build up our health in so many different ways. The shelter in place is to help us to not expose ourselves to others if we may be asymptomatic carriers, and also not to expose ourselves to other people who are carriers just as well. It's in place for us to take care of one another. And so that's what we're having to do during this time. How can we build up our marital health during this time so that when the challenges do come, hopefully we are built up so that it won't take us down to a place that we're so weakened, or that it won't be the death of our marriages. It's a difficult time. It really is. It's challenging times. And as I say, the healthiest of us are going to suffer just like the not so healthiest of us. So this is, I think, an opportunity for us as the church to make sure that we acknowledge this, to speak to it, to encourage you to seek out again that counseling if you have not done so. A couple of things I think about when I think about marriages, and as I have helped equip so many couples with premarital counseling over the numbers of years that I've been doing this. A couple of things that I would do if you were to reach out to me is, to definitely help you build up those communication skills, to explore the reasons why you have bypassed having certain conversations. Maybe you've been at an impasse for so long that you both have just kind of decided to agree to disagree and live at impasse, which might be easier, again, when you have the outlets to go to work, or, go and indulge in your hobbies, or nights out with friends, or whatever the case may be. But for some couples, it's just a matter of helping them to get realigned and kind of giving them some boosts to help them to be all the more healthy in terms of communication and helping to resolve some conflicts that might have been kind of long-standing. For those who may be at a little bit more of risk, it might very well be just having to go back and strengthen the foundation. It might have been that some couples didn't get any premarital counseling, or they just are not equipped with some of the necessary relational skills that we need to possess to sustain relationships. We so often think that these things happen naturally and organically, and bam, we just get in these relationships and expect them to be good. And that's just not always the case. So sometimes it will require going back and just doing some foundational work, which is, a little bit more involved, but it's still possible. And then sometimes it's those couples who do need to separate for reasons of safety and sanity. And we just have to understand that as long as we're in this fallen and broken world, these scenarios are going to be among us. And again, it just doesn't help us, even as the body of Christ, to be delusional and to be negligent to think that this is not some people's situations. Yes, we can surely pray. Yes, we can advise them to read scripture together. But sometimes the best thing that we can also advise is for people to move apart from one another, especially when it's just not safe to stay together. And that's just the way that is. So after you have heard my insights and my thoughts, my call, what will be your response? And the church said, thank you so much for listening and tuning in with me on tonight. Until next time, let anyone who has ears to hear listen to what the Spirit says to the churches. Be safe during these challenging times, and do what you can do to be helpful. Thank you so much.